Seeing how the Legacy of the Worthless series came to an end and somehow people are still clamoring for a continuation, even though I clearly said series finale, not season finale, I think it would be fair to explain why some often requested archetypes weren't featured on the series. Mind you, this doesn't mean I will never make a video about some of these. In fact, I'll point out which ones I really wanna cover once we get to them, but at the same time, some of these are just so horribly uninteresting they make me yawn by simply existing and will probably never be featured on the channel. Unless the power of bribery is involved. Anyway, welcome to the impromptu one-shot, Legacy of the Almost Worthless! Let's start off with probably the most requested one, ice barriers. Some of you may remember I actually made an ice barrier video a while ago, hoping that people would catch on to the joke and realize I'm not actually going to make a real Legacy of the Worthless for ice barriers, but as it tends to be with YouTube comment sections, that didn't work. The thing about ice barriers is that they have a reputation for being an archetype with overall decent effects, but almost a complete lack of synergy between their monsters. Which is not necessarily true. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are things like Numbing Grub, which might as well be an Ojama card, Samurai, which might be one of the worst draw power cards ever made, or Royal Knight, which still baffles me to this very day. But for each of those, you have some stun monsters which were decent for the time, such as Cryomancer, a Gravity Bind on legs, Warlock, an Anti-Spell Fragrance on legs, Medium, which makes for a great combo with Warlock, as well as a decent amount of cards to generate field presence like Grunard or Gantala, and Magic Triangle, which you can use to summon them. Ice barriers also have a fair amount of level 4 water attribute and level 2 aqua type monsters, which means they have access to... I'm not saying the name. And if you're not a stun enthusiast, you can always go for a good old wetlands beatdown. Please do, I'm so fucking tired of seeing this thing. Setting aside the fact they can barely summon their own synchros, if I were to list the downsides, I would say they definitely have issues with speed and recovery, but ice barriers today are better than they ever were, and Legacy of the Worthless most certainly accounts modern playability to measure a deck's overall usefulness. That's why it's called Legacy. Coming off from one water archetype into another, we have Cloudians, a set of cards I really wanted to talk about because I actually do like them a lot, but the problem lies in the fact that they have access to almost constant spot removal in the form of Cirrostratus and Acid Cloud, as well as Altus, also several ways of relatively consistent counter generation in the form of Storm Dragon and Cloudian Squall, and not to mention if you happen to be controlling a level 4 Cloudian and you summon Turbulence, it equals to an instant rank 1 and a rank 4, of which one is Bahamut Shark, which in turn vomits up a frog on the field. Combined with instant fusion, Cloudians in the modern day can actually make some pretty formidable fields, and even back at the time of their first new wave of support, the removal options they offered made for a pretty decent casual rogue deck, especially when combining their indestructibility with something like Sanctuary in the Sky or Spirit Barrier until you go for an extraordinarily painful Nimbusman OTK, and not to mention the amazing Quasar build, which sadly turned impossible due to the banning of Fishborg Blaster. Cloudians do have some problems in the consistency department, and their spell and trap lineup is a tad underwhelming, but they have more than enough plays available to them and they can produce very nasty boards given the time or a good hand, and they possess actual synergy between their monsters. I'll definitely make a video about these at some point, and I'll be sure to make a terrible yet relevant vaping joke while I'm at it, so look forward to that. One very popular suggestion was Steel Storm, and I cannot for the love of my life figure out why. I mean, they definitely are just worse monarchs, but that doesn't necessarily equal worthless by itself. They have their own tiny but admirable tribute engine with Cell, Scout, Gatekeeper and Caller, Mantis can potentially let you extend your plays, and Moth offers decent removal for the time, and while the higher level ones are usually too hard to bring out and not worth the effort, Longhorn, who gets his effect if you tribute at least one as opposed to 2 Steel Storm monsters, can actually help you with beatdown and monster removal. What people also fail to realize is that they belong to the unfortunately named Ulsorm archetype, meaning they have outside support such as Infestation, Pandemic and Infection, as well as access to Evil Storm Castor and Kirkion, meaning Steel Storms can casually shit out Ophion and Bahamut like an edgy bootleg version of Satellanites on a production line. If you're playing them completely pure without any additional Evil Storm support, well, no shit you're complaining, Evil Storms are also part of the archetype, and disregarding their existence for the sake of a Legacy of the Worthless video would be like making a Legacy of the Worthless for X-Sabers without acknowledging that double X-Sabers exist. So yeah, Steel Storms are just bad monarchs, but for what they are, they're perfectly serviceable. Among other stuff, some people really wanted me to do Drax, and while I do agree that they are first and foremost a very underwhelming beatdown focused archetype with a fair amount of cards to shit on and an absolutely bizarre final boss monster, we're talking about dinosaurs, a monster type with universal access to Solemn Judgment and Solemn Strike on legs, and for Legacy of the Worthless standards, the fact that Gaiba makes them super easy to summon already elevates them above your average Legacy of the Worthless gutter trash. Not to mention, dinos usually don't struggle with consistency, having 3 copies of Fossil Dig, which is essentially a better road meta, and possibly the main reason why I chose not to make a video about them, the fact that dinosaurs are about to get a possible ton of new support in the new structure deck, and if Phantasmal Missilosaurus is anything to go by, we should probably not be underestimating them in advance. I'm kinda disappointed I didn't get to finish off Legacy of the Worthless with a meteor explosion, what with the artwork of Drax impact and all, but at least I didn't have to nuke my own country for a video as a result. Oh boy, Violons! I have literally no idea why so many people wanted me to do a video on Violons, but I presume they looked at the cards, got tired of reading the word equip over and over, and took the archetype at face value for looking like an inconsistent clusterfuck of unrelated equip-based effects. And admittedly, some of their cards do fall into that category, but more than a half of their cards is perfectly playable and synergetic, and depending on the engine you're using, their 3 most popular builds are more than enough to give most Legacy of the Worthless decks a run for their money. Those builds being Sigma OTK, which focuses on abusing lots of mage power, Epsilon Control for a decent amount of protection and removal, and Omega Turbo, which I described in my video about Guardians. They're also one of the few archetypes that can pride themselves on having a really nicely splashable level 4 tuner, and I know this isn't playstyle related, but goddamn, I am in love with their visual design. The combination of sleek white geometrical construction with details of golden plating covering these abstractly shaped angelic war machines is like, my eyes are ejaculating! Easily my favorite archetype when it comes to artwork. One of their downsides is a massive lack of consistency due to the number of spells they run that are completely useless without a specific monster you need at that moment, but when Violons go off, they go off really hard. I might make a video covering them one day, and if you want to see one of the most interesting things that came out of early Dual Terminal, do check out Violons. And now for the suggestions that can be easily refuted in a couple of sentences, because I can't write essays about all of these. Naturia. One word. Sacred Tree. Wait, that's 2 words. Sacred Tree allows you to unclog the worst of Naturia hands and effectively replaces the Naturia part of your deck with extremely splashable trap tricks, and searching out trap holes is a bit too much for a mere Legacy of the Worthless deck. Aliens. A lot of people are under the impression that aliens are good only because of Golgar, and while it is a decent monster that shifted them to rogue status for a little while, it's a bit outdated nowadays, and the thing that aliens are actually really decent for is spreading A counters with a new spell which also boosts their consistency, using those A counters for control effects and swarming the field surprisingly efficiently, and I would like to make a video about them sometime soon. Gimmick Puppets. I do hate the fact that their entire main deck is just a rank 8 engine with literally nothing else going for it, but compared to other garbage I reviewed in the series, just being made around rank 8 spamming instantly makes them a lot more viable than most things present here. Dustons. Too small, too gimmicky, too irrelevant. Same goes for Cyberdark and Malicevorus, even though I was originally planning to do Cyberdark, but planning in advance is not one of my stronger sides. Bouncers. Building a deck around these things quickly turns into how fast can I churn out Beatrice and make it count? Also, most of the time you don't even draw any of them. Vampires. The metric fuckton of new zombie support gives them consistent access to Zolkin. I wanted to review them for Halloween, but you can blame Unizombie for destroying the spirit of the season. Mist Valley. I'm sorry, these effects are just so fucking boring it hurts. It's barely even a competent archetype, but there's just nothing really horrible about them to shit on. Oh, effects about self-bouncing. You have a limited card? Who would have thought that self-bouncing of all things would lead to massive degenerate FTKs? Also, fuck this thing. This thing in particular, mainly because they designed it before they knew pendulums were gonna be a thing. Crystal Beasts. Being based on a very interesting gameplay mechanic about monsters in the spell and trap zone, which wasn't really revisited until years later with artifacts, Crystal Beasts suffer from an overabundance of mediocre effects, but the plays they are capable of with their newer support can be fairly impressive, provided they don't get blown up in the back row zone. One baffling thing is the fact that their pendulum monsters still haven't been imported from the OCG, but while we're on that topic, said pendulum monsters happen to help out with a massive number of the archetype's problems. Fortune Ladies. The amount of spellcaster support we got over the years, and the fact that Fortune Ladies can fairly decently pull off chaos builds, along with having a decent draw engine and a somewhat clear win condition, makes them tolerable enough not to be in the series. Earthbound Immortals. Boss monsters you're not supposed to use in the same deck. Butter Spies. Oh please, it's a rank 4 spam focused archetype, I don't care how bad it is. It's better than all Legacy of the Worthless decks by default. And that would be all I can think of. If I missed anything, please do point it out in the comments and I'll be sure to tell you why you're wrong. Jokes aside, happy holidays everyone, have a ranked and new year, remember to subscribe and I'll see you next time in the announcement video for War of the Worthless.